Some of us don't have really good connections to Lululemon. Just our W and Co.
Lululemon.
Stop it.
Oh, wow. Takel, you're the biggest hit we've had so far. We had a town hall last night for all our clubs, and I had 38, and we're far surpassed that right now. We're 41. You're the biggest hit. Who would have thought a funny talking Welshman would be the biggest hit in our webinar series?
It might have been his warm-up act that got him over the line. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I thought Rusty's warm-up act was pretty good for today. I'm surprised he's able to eat. He was shaking and he was particularly nervous.
He did a lot of deflecting, didn't he?
It's hot.
There.
I enjoyed the tax. I enjoyed the kicking video. I think it's good.
Thanks, man.
Just okay, guys. First of all, I want to apologize for the confusion. We had two links, and so when I spoke to Pete Houlihan, we had 15 people in one room, and then we had another 20 on in another room. So I believe that Pete did put a message in the chat room. So I really do hope that everybody has got the correct information now. We're filling up nicely here. So I do think that we're going to be in reasonable shape. Just a little bit, just very quickly, rules of engagement. We will put everybody on mute. If you do have any questions, if you can just pop them in the chat function. I'm particularly honoured and excited to co-host this with Jacko from Rugby Nova Scotia. He's looking particularly dressed up right now. The real question, Jack, is do you have pants on? I'm not sure if you would like to approve or concur or deny.
I think depending on how Aaron's presentation goes, we should keep that as a save the webinar type thing for later on.
Okay, you got it. I know the answer to your question, Alex, and I will we will oh, Jack, you're coming up again. Shall I let you in again, Jack?
No, you're fine.
Okay, you're just in the waiting room, so we're good to go. Okay, just a bit of thing, Aaron. I have hit record on this webinar, and if it's okay with you and you're happy with it at the end of the webinar, we will share it in the Rugby Alberta Coaches Corner group. I will also pass you on the video because it's your stuff, and I'll also give it to Jacko over on the East Coast, and he can share and do it as he wants. So I'm just going to put everybody on mute right now, and then unmute Aaron and Jack. Might leave Jack on mute the whole time. We'll see how he goes. Okay. Jacko, are you back?
I'm back.
Okay. Should we let Aaron speak?
I think it's time.
Okay. I just got to find him here. I'm not used to having so many people on the webinars. There we go. Takel, are you with us?
I'm here.
Great. I'm just going to give a real brief. Aaron's pretty well known around the rugby community, particularly in Alberta. Aaron first moved out here a number of years ago, and he joined the Druids Rugby Club. And rumor has it he has more rugby jerseys from the clubs in Edmonton than anybody else. He's played for a number of different clubs. And at that time, he worked as a rugby development officer for Rugby Alberta for a number of years. He also was the technical director. When he finished up with that role, he had a student visa, went and studied education, and then obviously upon graduating from school, he got a job as the analyst with Rugby Canada. Did a fantastic job there. Been able, I believe, combine his rugby knowledge, the skills and analysis that he developed, and also his teaching background and knowledge as well. So pretty well rounded, and did a great job of being the analyst for Rugby Canada for a number of years. He then, when he finished that, recently married, got a lovely baby girl, and he was a PE teacher at SMU. He then took a role with BC Rugby as their development officer, and now has a cool new title, which escapes me at this current moment, in charge of growth and development, I think, for the BC Rugby Union and the men's game. Is that right, Aaron?
That's pretty accurate, Moff, yeah.
Pretty accurate. That's good enough for me. We're excited to have Aaron on here. I was texting with Aaron earlier on in the week. I actually was looking through my old Wolfpack notes and I found the first stat sheet that Aaron sent to me in 2015, and it was one piece of paper with some different information on it, handwritten, and just to see how far he's come in his development. And I'll say a lot of it's been self-developed because he was just thrown to the wolves really, and came out the other side doing pretty well. So thanks for having us on, for joining us, Aaron. Jacko, anything from you want to add?
Yeah, I'm just going to throw in a Google Docs, which will just trying to capture everybody's email, and basically, if anyone has any other aspects that they'd like to see in a webinar format, we're hoping to do a lot of these conjoint efforts together. It's been great to see so many active Canadian webinars throughout it, but if you just want to take a couple of minutes to tie it down, we'll also send you the link of what was presented today. I think originally when Rugby Nova Scotia started talking to Aaron, I think it was always about the basis of analysis and what you can take and use and bring it into our practices. So for me, really looking forward to hearing that and capturing some learning. Awesome.
Aaron, do you want to give us an overview on what you want to talk about? I know you've got a slide deck that you'll likely share too. You're more than obviously to happy to do that now, or if you just like to maybe talk to us and give us a bit of context first, feel free to do that as well.
Yeah, let's see if I can share my screen here first. All right. How's that looking?
It's a big to-do list you had on your desktop, but we can see your slide deck. We're good to go.
Okay, yeah, so I'll cover a lot of the introduction stuff in some of the slides, some of the objectives. It's really cool, the amount of stuff that's been on Twitter. There's tons of stuff recently. Obviously, Rusty's on the line, and they've just done something to do with practice design. There's been some cool stuff to come as well. I know Jack Patterson's going to be doing some later on in the week. There was some stuff this morning as well. So really, this is around linking the knowledge that I gained as a performance analyst working with some programs over here in Canada, and now being a coach and trying to marry the two together. And also bearing in mind that analysis is normally based around the finances you have or the resources you have, and a lot of our development coaches don't have that. So it was grown. I was listening to the Magic Academy podcast with Eddie Jones, and Eddie said, I think it was a question from Rusty around, how have you reflected on the World Cup final? What are you thinking? And he said, what's on your screen there? The game will give you feedback on your preparation. So I found it really interesting that Eddie Jones, actually taking an awful lot of what happened in that World Cup final on his own shoulders and talking about how he prepared the team, not how the team performed, which I think is a big weight to take on your shoulders, but I was really impressed with that. Some of the other things that you'll see in here, so it's really going to go down the line of how do coaches reflect on their performance rather than how do analysts or coaches reflect on the performance of the player. So I use the terminology as turning the camera back on the coach rather than having it pointed at the players all the time. And what can we do to improve our preparation and practice so that our game gives us direct feedback to how we prepared throughout the week. There's a webinar this morning. Somebody used the quote, standing on the shoulders of giants. I don't know if this applies here, but just to give some recognition to some people that have really influenced me recently. So we've had Rusty over here in Alberta and in BC twice. Scott Wisemantle there. Obviously the three of us that are hosting, we're at a conference with him back the end of last year, and I'd spent a week at Stellenbosch with him under a World Rugby program. And then two coaches there that are involved in the London Irish Club with their DPP program, and taken a ton of stuff from them. So Jack Patterson and Rhys Davis. And if you've never connected with any of these guys or connected with their resources, I highly recommend you do so. So a couple of things then to build us into this. So these are the ideas that are currently influencing me or have influenced me. And essentially what I'm trying to do is adopt them or adapt them to build resources for developers in BC and beyond if other people want to use them. It's my perspective that I think performance analysis is often around the performance of the player and not the coach. And I'm wondering if we can change that perspective, or what can we do to reflect a little bit more on our coaching, and can performance analysis and what we currently have influence that. And then most of the skills are used around the performance environment. So professional, international, you don't generally see performance analysis around the club game. And if you do, it's generally used in a particular way. So I'm starting to look at, can we simplify some of these skills and tools so that coaches in the club game, in the grassroots game, and things like that, can we give people access to them, or can we change what's doing at one end of the spectrum so that other people have access to it? So that's kind of where I'd like to go with some of this today. I want to highlight off the back of what Rusty and Fletch just did. I think a lot of that webinar was probably a little bit around some practice, but a lot of theory. I'm not going to go into any theory today. It's actually going to be quite a satellite view. So really just kind of skimming the surface of some of these topics. And the biggest thing to take away is this is a work in progress. This isn't finished. I'm currently playing with this on a day-to-day basis. I don't have all the answers. This isn't the finished product, but I want to show you some of my ideas that I've taken from other people and how I'm starting to adapt them and adopt them into the way that I would like to see rugby played and coached. So just to give you an idea, on a weekly basis, clubs in our Premier League in BC, of which there are 13, get a stat sheet from Rugby, from BC Rugby. And this just gives you an idea of some of the things that we'll be giving them some reflection on. So this is UBC, the University of British Columbia, and we've analyzed over the course of this season 12 games. It just gives you just a clean one-pager of consistent data that we give to those clubs. We'll also provide them on a weekly basis with a league comparison. So just averages across the league to give them some context so they can see where do they sit in relation to other clubs and the rest of the league. And this will just be WhatsApped out to coaches. But this is currently where we are as far as performance analysis and how we're trying to influence coaches within our leagues with the information that we're giving out. And this is something that I tweeted out the other day. It's a lot of numbers. And I guess the reflection on this is, how are we using these numbers to influence our clubs, our practice design, what's useful, what isn't, what are they taking away? Is there any biases there? Are people using it potentially even for the wrong reasons? What do the numbers mean? Which ones are important? Which ones aren't? Callum Ramsey did a really good webinar yesterday around the numbers have to be actionable. And my question to myself now is, which of these numbers is actionable? Or is it just telling us a story that we probably already know? So moving forward from that, my objective today is based around, I've been looking at some documents with some of our other provincial partners, and I've seen this crop up a couple of times. So I want to base what I'm going to present today around it. So in two different places. So in Alberta with the Alberta Way and in Ontario, I've seen this statement, and it says player-centered, development-driven, and competition-supported. And sometimes we come up with these things and we never really live them. They don't really live and breathe, and we don't action them. So what I'd like to do today is take those three statements and kind of build that as a framework, some information around it. So here's what I'm looking at. I would suggest, and I'm happy to be challenged on it, but I think it's more and more prevalent now, is that the player-centered stuff is around coaching behaviors. And how I can bring analysis into that is actually analyzing the coach, their behavior, their language, and using it intentionally. The second thing, the development-driven, is the training or the practice environments. And in the development side of the game, we'd like to have environments where coaches and players are encouraged to take risks, try something different, and focus on the acquisition of skill. And then using analysis to bring some of that content to life, to try and drive a little bit more understanding with players, with co-coaches, and to make sure that training looks like the game. And then finally, the competition supported is using the competition to provide an environment where players can express themselves, but particularly around implementing what they've learned throughout the week. And then making sure that the reflection and the review of that, so the analysis of the competition, really looks like what you've done throughout the week. So the game actually looks like training, and they marry up really well. So that's going to be the basis of where I'd like to go with this today. So 3 kind of main sections: one around the coach, one around the training environment, and then one around the review of the game. And like I said, a lot of this stuff has been adapted from some really key individuals. So
Aaron, can I just ask you a question? I mean, just on the stats before we get too far in. A really good question coming here from the audience is, how much of this information is filtered to the clubs, and how much of an influence and or support do the performance pathways have upon the club game? If you're okay to answer that.
Yeah, so those 1 pages, each club will get that. Each club gets a copy of the other clubs as well. So everybody gets a copy of everybody's information, and we have a league-wide stat sheet as well. So every club has every bit of information. We also use Coach Logic, where we upload our games and they are coded for every club. So they can go in and find that information as well and link it directly to the video analysis on that platform.
Thanks, mate.
Okay, so the first strand around a player-centered environment really for me looks a lot like the coaching behaviors and the coach language. So some of the stuff that I've picked up along the way, there are a number of different models. And really what this diagram is just showing is the different types of communication or different types of coach behavior that you might see within a session. This is one that Rusty has shared in a number of presentations. I had to Google this. This is called a tree map version of a graph. But essentially, the bigger the square, the rectangle, the higher the frequency or the volume. So you'll see in this example, silence was used more frequently than, say, direct management. Another version that I've used in the past would be this one, so the Arizona State University Observation Instrument. So essentially what this is doing is breaking down language, breaking down communication. And then from an analyst perspective, you can go in and start pulling that information out. So once you've quantified something, once you've kind of put it into a box and defined it, then you can start pulling that information out, coding, training sessions. So for those of you that know me, I love to have a GoPro on a coach. It gives you a really great perspective and it picks up all the language. And then you can go back in and start pulling this information out. So I started to do that as a bit of a project. This one's an example of a developing coach at a club here in BC. And I guess there's no real context around this other than I'll start to share with you that this is a very keen coach who's asking for help, who is deliberately using certain ways to design and develop practice. You'll see on the far left-hand side, 71% of the activity was small-sided games. There was only a fraction of it was block practice or drills. The warm-up was quite quick and actually involved some small-sided games. There were quite a few questions in there. Effort was praised. The session timing was pretty good. So there's some really good numbers that you could pull out of this. Some people would immediately go into that talk time, and the context here is that there's actually a brand new player that never played rugby in this session. So sometimes part of the learning process is there has to be communication. You don't want to see that number being a 0. So that was one example of how you can pull some information out of a training session on behalf of a coach, and then just start breaking down what kind of environment, what kind of behavior, and what kind of language is that coach using. And is it indicative of the environment you're trying to create? The second example was actually a coach here in Canada that's actually on the pathway, I would say, of a national age grade program. And I've selected this one because it's fairly polar opposite to what you saw in the previous example. Similar length of a session, activity time down to 28% of the session. The observation number is huge for me. So what were the behaviors of this coach? You could probably start suggesting or making arguments that there was a lot of instruction. There was a lot of hustle, and hustle for me is defined by A lot of go, go, go. Here's where to go. Generally white noise. Probably players aren't really hearing or implementing that information. A lot of the feedback was corrective feedback. It wasn't really, it wasn't positive. And it certainly was, if there was anything positive, you can see it was to a group rather than to individual praise or feedback to an individual player. And in an hour and 10 minutes, only 12 questions asked. So you could start to then dig a little bit deeper using analysis to start to understand some of the coaching behaviors within those sessions. Do you want me to pause for any questions there, Moff?
Sorry, you're off the hook right now unless Jack has anything. You're on mute, Jack.
Sorry, I think just on the behaviors, it's great to kind of break them down in such detail that you did, Aaron. When speaking with the coaches, some people always just focus in on one or two behaviors that they really want to be seen as. But we want, in your experience, do we want to try and highlight that there, multiple behaviors will come up in lots of different scenarios?
Yeah, I think the answer is, if you're looking at, is there one particular behavior that is you prefer over the other? I think it depends. And that's why I said that it's about being intentional. So you should go into planning your session, understanding how you're gonna operate and how you're gonna communicate to players. So you might start setting yourself a goal of, perhaps I'm just in this session, I'm just gonna let the players try to solve problems. So you're noticing and your silence might go up. It might be a brand new concept, or there might be a lot of information, or it might be a situation where safety is involved. So therefore your talk time might go up, or it might be a little bit more instructional. So I think really you've just got to be intentional around how you're behaving as a coach, rather than.
Just one follow-up on it, Aaron. Is there any, when you're debriefing this, I presume you've debriefed it with coaches before, is there any particular behavior that they're almost a little bit shocked that it's a notable behavior? Yeah,
almost all of them. I think your perception when you're in the middle of a training session, you don't actually realize that at the end of it all, there was only less than 30% of it the players are actually active and doing stuff. And I think if you asked a coach that immediately after a session, it would probably be there'd be quite a separation between what their reality is and what the actual reality is. So I think the fact that you can go in, pull these numbers out, and also have the video footage to back some of that stuff up. So when you're using analysis tools, you can then go back that stuff up. So those 12 questions you asked, I can pull those questions out and you can review how was your questioning? Did you wait for a response? Was it targeted to an individual? What types of questions were they? That kind of stuff. So I think, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully we can get a new behavior of like funny jokes and stuff like that, because I didn't see that being really identified there, but we'll take that offline.
Actually, I think in the Arizona State one, I think humor is in their matrix. So you'd score pretty high on that one.
Great. Let's see, I got to move.
Aaron, I got a couple of other questions here, if it's okay just to ask them now. I think they're all relative to this behaviours. I'm not sure if you're going to talk further about them. A couple of questions around the context of the stats and the information you provided. Was it a co-coaching session, or were they coaching on their own? Were they coaching with other people? And if they were coaching with other people, does that maybe impact how much they're talking? Was one of the main questions that came in here. And I've got another one as well, if I can just give you both at the same time, maybe able to tie them together. And the second question, which is a good question, how much of this was in their session plan, i.e. had they planned to behave in a particular way or manner?
So for the first question, the first example was an individual coaching by themselves. And the planning, there was a lot more planning. So if let's go back to it. So some of the things that will start to drive to dig a little bit further. So the transition between activities, I would say, is quite low. So this coach had showed up early, laid stuff out, used different areas of the field so that players don't have to wait around to transition from activity to activity. It was intentional around the small-sided games and the activities that she used. And it was intentional around the questions and where those questions took place. So there was a lot of planning in that one, and it was individually coached. The second example was co-coached. There was planning around the content of the session, but there was no planning around the coach behavior or roles, responsibilities, and co-coaching and working with each other. There was none in that example.
Okay, thanks, Mick. Appreciate that. I have one more question, if it's okay, and then we'll let you move on. Is would you recommend using GoPro, with even club junior sides, U14, U16? Is it a good method, or could it be a distraction?
Yeah, I don't find it a distraction at all. I think in my experience, you'll get a couple of comments early in the session from a player that wants to be on the footage, and then it almost gets forgotten. And I think you get a really realistic view of what happens within that session. I've even started to use them with referees now as well, and as part of their development, positioning, what they're looking at, what are their scanning abilities like, what's their communication like to players, and conversely, what are players, can players learn from referees? So what are referees looking at and things like that? Would I recommend them? I'm biased. I would highly recommend them. Obviously, the younger you go, you might have to deal with, safety and getting people's acknowledgement and permission to film. But I would encourage every coach to use one if you get the opportunity to. Thanks,
Aaron. Appreciate the answers.
Okay, so the second strand of this is around development driven. I think if I had to come out to its widest view, you could almost live in two areas: development and performance. Again, you could have a debate around that. What does it look like? Where do they overlap? I think everybody will have a perspective of where does their team fit in. If you had to put it in one of those two categories, does it fit in one, or does it overlap with another? I've had conversations with coaches and say, earlier in the season, we sit in development, and then later on in the season, it's all about performance. It's all about the results. And that might even be for an under 14s team. I have my own opinion on that, but to use those words, I think when it comes to practice design, I saw this and it makes me start to think about how do kids learn? What do they go to? And I think also, what does it look like from a coach's perspective? How comfortable are you if your training session looks like it does on the right-hand side? Are you comfortable in a little bit of mess with a little bit of chaos and people just expressing themselves and learning and being creative? Or are you quite neat, put things in a box? You want everything to start and finish and be in control. And I see a lot of coaching on the left-hand side with the pilot rather than on the right-hand side. So to give our coaches in BC a little bit more tools in their bag or clubs in their bag, we used Rusty, and this is a slide from Jack Patterson in his practice design slide. And we used this as the fundamental basis of our coaches conference earlier this year. And what I really liked about this is it just shows coaches that there are more than one way to operate within a training session. And there's not one right way. I think there needs to be balance. And I think there needs to be influence from all of these different areas. But the question would be is how many coaches actually dig into some of these other boxes, or do they only really stay in one box? And generally that one is block practice or drills. So what is the role and responsibility of them? How do we link them? And then I guess my last question in this environment is how can it help you? Another document that both you and I are both quite liking at the moment, again, shared to us by, I think it was England Field Hockey, correct? And I just love this. This was around actually the coach education. So this was a menu of learning. And I just really like the concept. So I've adapted, again, taken stuff and I've adapted it to start to build myself a menu that relates to these tools in the toolbox, so these practice design principles. So I've come up with this. This is one of 3 menus. And when I say it's a menu, Moff, I see this as a menu at a buffet, not a menu at a restaurant. there's a lot of things on this menu, and what I want is just to guide coaches to start selecting some really good stuff off the menu, because I think it's all good stuff. But you have to be intentional about what you're going to select off the menu. So appetizers are the block practice or skill zones. Mains are the small-sided games. Desserts, I've actually combined two, so tactical warfare or scenarios and gamification. And then the sides are things that can help you in and around your delivery. So my vision for this is for coaches to be able to start planning their session design by picking off the menu. And that menu might, for that day might be intentional. It might be something we haven't done before. It might be, what do the players find most fun? It might even be letting the players decide what they want to do and start designing their practices and giving them some scope to make decisions. So I'm starting to build this out, linked to 3 principles, again, that I've adapted from the London Irish DPP. So this one would be linked to getting the ball back. So more of a defensive theme session. But so you can see under the appetizers, the block practice would be the skills that you would probably use to get the ball back. So just to bring this to life a little bit and how I'm starting to build these resources, I see this as a balance, and there's no right or wrong one way over the other. There are people that have biases. Rusty's probably smiling when I say that he would certainly be leaning on the gamification. I think the answer here is, when you're looking to balance out how much do you use of what in what order and how are you designing all of this stuff, again, go back to that picture. I think it has to be kind of a little bit of everything, and it has to be messy and not all in one box. But I would certainly encourage coaches in a development environment to lean to that right-hand side, where we're starting to ask questions about the game. So the tactical, the unstructured, or even sometimes chaotic side of the game, because that's where a lot of really great learning can take place. So just to bring it to life, so this would be an example of a main. This is a small-sided game that's been adapted that I've called South Africa. So at the top there, and I've taken the design of this again from some adapted games that I've seen. I've actually pulled a lot of these off of Twitter. I think I've got about 14 games now. So this would be essentially a kicking game. It does involve kicking, and you can score through kicking, but it brings a lot of other elements into the game around space, scanning, sharing information, different types of defense, different types of attack, how to apply pressure, looking for space. So the rules of the game would be a full field game, tries worth 7, and kicking the ball into the opposition target zone gets you 3 points. Inside your half, you have 3 phases, and then you must kick. And if you get over halfway, you get a bonus 7 phases. And for this one, I would modify the contact. So in the tackle area, a ruck would be around the waist. So the field would look something like this. And you can use this then to start incorporating some of the skills that you want to see. And then as a coach, you're really going back to some of these questions you would see under the attacking coach focus and the defensive coach focus, to make sure that coaches are intentionally coaching and not just facilitating and refereeing. So how does analysis come into this? Because there's a lot of coaching tools here, but what I'm using my analysis is to bring this to life through some different types of video. So what I'm going to try and do is change my screen here and show you a video. It's a 2-minute video just about how to bring this game to life. So this is still a work in progress. I'll go back to it. When I created this video, I still had this kind of bias in mind that this is you score by kicking to the corner. And I think what I need to do here is start to develop this video into this could be an awful lot about your kick chase. Part of the game is if the opposition don't get over halfway within 3 phases, then they must kick the ball. So it might be a lot around your kick chase. It might be a lot around how you defend those first 3 phases. It might be around setting some space traps and things like that. So that just gives you an idea of how I'm starting to approach these games, build some resources around it, and start to understand why are we using these games, what's their role, and how do they fit into the bigger picture, and using some analysis to be able to pull that together. And then this is an example that I would use then to change something possibly from a main to a small-sided game, and a real simplistic way of changing it into probably a dessert. So this might be more around the gamifying simplistically what you already have as a baseline game. So this would be that South Africa game. Still, the concept is around getting the ball back, but you're using the game as a framework to highlight certain skills that you're looking for within that game. So each team would start at level 1, and then you're essentially trying to win the game by getting to that boss level. So again, going back to all the really cool stuff that the Magic Academy is doing around gamifying things and using levels and creating some competition within it by highlighting the skills that you're looking at. So this would just be one example of changing something on that menu from, like I said, a main to a dessert. So I'll pause again there. That's the second strand around design. Still let them off.
Yeah, I'm just trying to read a couple of questions here, Aaron. If you want to, do you want me to ask them now, or just let you continue on?
Do you want to do it at the end? It's up to you. You're the boss.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Two, one's an interesting one here, and I'll read it just to make sure I get it right. How does the game approach different for teams with larger skill gaps, i.e., players in their first session or a player in their 10th year of rugby? You know, how do you maybe look to address this in terms of experience where some kids like, I just never get past the ball?
Yeah, really cool question. One of the first things that jumps into my mind, I would encourage that person to look at some of the information around Game Zone, Skill Zone, or the co-coaching piece, which is really important. So identifying players that are struggling and maybe either just pulling them out. Again, going back to some of the really cool stuff that Rusty's doing around having a skills master. So if you notice somebody that's struggling potentially with the skill or doesn't quite have that skill level to participate fully within that game, how can you help that individual? And I think that again goes back to really good coaching practice. So you could have, let's say you've got a large group of players with a wide range of ability. Could you split into 3 teams? 2 are playing within that game zone, and 1's in a skill zone working on the skills that can be applied back into that game. So you're being pulled out, you're doing some block practice, and you're getting some skills under less pressure. Or again, could you just have 2 teams and have some really good skills masters that are pulling people out, working on them individually, and just having set that up really well in advance so that, you know, it's not a reflection. You're not terrible at the game, but this is helping you, and this is how I can help you, or things like that. So that's what I would encourage coaches to look at as some really good co-coaching practice, and then looking at the concept of game zone, skill zone.
Thanks, Aaron. And just one more question, just relating back to the South Africa game. Questions just come in here. You know, how does a team get from one level to the other? Is that you just adding layers onto the scoring system, or?
So both teams will start at level 1. So when you complete the skill, you move to level 2, or it could be you complete it 3 times. So for this one, the skills that I'm looking for when it's a theme around getting the ball back is a double hit and then a choke tackle holding somebody up and getting the ball back. Once that team has completed that, then they're looking to move on to the next one. So the next one that they're looking to get and tick off is a double hit, and this time it's rip the ball out of that player's hands. So one team might be on level 2 and one team might be on level 1, or any other variations of that.
That's awesome. Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, so the last one is around having our competitions support some of these developmental practices and things like that. So how do we measure? Because I would say that one of the primary coach's roles is to ensure that the stuff you do during the week, you see on the weekend, if you play on the weekends. And I've heard the term used before, training transfer. So making sure that the skills that you've learned and you understand, you can apply them. Because essentially that's what we're learning to do, is to apply skills in that game or competition environment. So how do you measure that? I don't see enough of that. I sometimes see the game review doesn't really reflect your preparation throughout the week. So again, I've taken some information. I'm going to change my screen again. So using analysis skills, I have access to sports code. Those of you that are on that have an analysis background, you'll recognize this very quickly. For those of you that don't, this is just a tool that a lot of analysts use around the world. You have the video window, and in this case, multiple angles. And then each one of these boxes is a video clip filed. It's almost like a filing cabinet. So each line is a different folder within the file. And then I've also scripted using computers, scripting through sports code, an output window. So these are my 3 strands. So almost an attack, play to space, fight to plays around the breakdown area. So contact actions and ball presentation, and then get the ball back, which is our defense and cutting down options. And then the yellow are the skills that I'm looking for underneath or within those strands. And I've added a value to each one of those. So if you, in attack, if you're looking to play to space, if you get 3 passes or more, that's worth 1 point. If you create a line break, that's worth 2. In our contact area, if you lift the ball off the ground, either up into somebody's hands, it's going to move it away from the breakdown, or pop it from the ground to speed that play up, that's worth 2. So you'll see that they increase in value on the way down. Charging down a kick is worth 5 points. And one of the really cool things that analysts can do is, once you hit the report function on here, so report mode, it actually reads all the information that you've coded from the game. So automatically now I'm almost getting a spreadsheet of the number of events. So 3 passes or more, we had 6 in the first half, 4 in the second half, is worth 10 points. And then it totals those towards the bottom. So why is this good? I think it reflects the skills, from that dessert game where you're looking for certain skills. It's again reflecting what are the skills that we were looking for in training and how we're pulling them out of the game, or it helps you with your benchmarking. One of the other cool things that you can do with this software is, if I want to, for example, look at some of these events, just by clicking on it, it will automatically populate the video and change the angle. I'm going to take the sound out of here. So for this one, this is somebody lifting the ball off the ground. And I can just quickly flick through and find other examples. So not only have I got numbers, I can link that directly back to video as well. So how is this useful? I think the most important thing to do with this then is ask some really good questions to make sure that you've got some really good reflection from the coaches and from players. So essentially, this will give you an idea. If you've worked all week on charging kicks down, and you're not getting any on the weekend, you might start to ask questions about why not? Is there understanding? Did I not get some of the learning points across? Is the way that we are practicing something like that relevant to the game? Are we really giving relevant pictures to this that they're understanding and seeing those pictures during the game? So, in this one, you'll see we scored 0 points, first phase set piece try. So Typically, then I would go back into how can our strike moves be more efficient? Does the way we practice them prepare us for the game? I would say in this scenario, from that particular game, I would suggest it doesn't. Traditionally, strike moves are performed in isolation, probably with little pressure, most of the time without any opposition. So are we really preparing ourselves for the game? So this would be a reflective question that I would go back and ask around how are we preparing for the game in relation to what we're doing off a set piece. I thought we scored quite well in this game off of passing out of contact. So some of the questions you might ask around what affords us the opportunity to pass out of contact. So what does it look like? What does good practice look like? Who does it well and why? Can we use them? Can that player teach other players around what they're trying to do? What's preventing us from charging kicks down, like I just talked about? And then how can we be more threatening to the opposition when we turn the ball over? Again, two areas where we didn't score any points. So this might then start to build back into my practice design for that following week, or allow players just to investigate a little bit more. Maybe this might be something that I value a little bit more in that training design. Some of the other things that you can learn from here is quite simple benchmarking. So you've got a numerical value there. So could you start asking questions around how can we get that total? How can we beat that total? How can we set some simple goals for the next game? What does that look like? Where do we need to score well to score good points? That kind of thing. So that's how I feel we can take some of the analysis around reviewing performance and building it back into training and making sure that the training looks like the game and the game looks like training.
Aaron, that's excellent stuff, and it's great to see. I suppose how clean that is, and I think coaches would really. It wouldn't be an intimidating graphic for sure, which is great. In terms of the number, if we were starting at say high school level and moving up, so let's say because we have some coaches here that are involved in the high school program, how would you bring in some of these numbers, or to what extent would you bring it in for your coaching staff and for your high school players who might be seeing numbers in the game for the first time?
I think one of the really good things about this, Jack, is if I take this off, I think you can build this how you want to build it. This is just a version of it. You can take things away. You can add things in, things that you value a little bit more. You can rank a little higher. You certainly don't have to do it this way. I think there's a lot of adaptability here. So if some of these numbers are daunting, then minimize it a little bit. And make sure that you're putting in there what you value or what you've trained, so that you're getting direct feedback on what you've done in your preparation. And again, go back to that original quote, let the game give you feedback on your preparation. So I think this would clearly give, over time, some feedback on how we prepared for competition.
And can I in your experience, let's say we have some sort of pandemic in the world or something, and there's no video cameras, and you've no laptops. Other ways of creating some numbers with your teams? Yeah,
I mean, in its most simplistic way, this could almost be a tally sheet. It doesn't have to be using sports code technology and all those other things. I think it'd be quite easy for somebody to sit back if you've got some injured players, if you've got some other coaches, to either do it in the moment, post-game, if you've got some video footage, of just starting to tally up some of these events. I think it's quite simplistic that way. The only thing you can't do is link it to the video, but I think the numbers are still powerful.
Yeah. Great. Feedback coming here, just a recommendation here is that, if people are scared of numbers, could use a red, amber, green scenario. If they wanted, yeah, it's ultimately what's going to work for your team or work with a group that you're working with. But Aaron, I'd like to firstly thank you for not showing all the footage you'd shown me earlier in the week of the Wolfpack scoring getting scored on 500 times by BC and Kelowna this summer. So I'm glad you listened to that advice and made some good friends here out in the prairies. Actually,
it was an interesting conversation because it made me think: does a score need to be on here? If again you're going back to a development environment, what's more important? Are you really encouraging people to take risks and do something differently if you're going to show them, that you're on the wrong end of a big score? So I actually took it out, not because of that, the reason you probably think. I just think if we're truly building a development environment where we're not afraid to take risks, and it's really about your own performance and not the performance of the opposition, technically, then why do you need to score on there? I don't think it really reflects your performance that well.
Do you have more slides, Aaron? Because I have a question, but I wouldn't mind going back a few slides, but I don't want to, are you done?
Yeah.
Okay. One question, if you go back, you had your different country games. You had your South Africa, and you gave us a good example of the South Africa game. You'd mentioned Scott Wisemantel there and how influential he's been on you. One of the key things he always talks about is you have to have a philosophy. So, twofold question, I guess, are these games based around your playing philosophy and the key things you're trying to get? Or are you playing these different types of games so players can become pretty well rounded in different styles of play? I'm assuming that your Scotland, Ireland, South Africa examples will all be very different styles of play.
Yeah, so they are games that I've picked up along the way, and I've started to think about who plays that way. I'm trying to bring it to life a little bit around, and you saw in that video, clearly South Africa are quite good at playing. They'd be good at the South Africa game.
They were very good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look at it, and sometimes it's not what you think. If you had to describe South Africa and how they play, sometimes you probably wouldn't go down that route. So I've got a bank of games that both reflect where they sit in the menu. So all of the games under that mains category there have an element of getting the ball back. So it might be like a primary function of that game, or it might be that it's based quite a lot around there, or that there is a rule in there that reflects getting the ball back. So what I would say is 14 is quite a lot. I think you could adapt those games. I've set a challenge for some coaches to start ranking some of these games by difficulty. So if I was a coach of an under 14s team and kicking to an offside player is a really difficult skill for them, well, I'd probably give that quite a high difficulty ranking. And maybe that will be something that we build towards. It wouldn't be the first game that I would start with.
Okay. No, thanks, mate. Could you maybe just a question coming here, and you may have touched on it, but maybe just elaborate a bit more. Could you maybe just talk through how the menu is used in practice? Is the menu given to the players before the practice and they select the games and things that they want to play, or how do you potentially see it being navigated? I know this is a relatively new concept for us and we're working through it.
Yeah, I've used it in two different ways. And I haven't married the two together because I think it'd be an interesting exercise. But really, one is for coaches to allow them to design their practice and just say, and what I'm really looking to do is, here's a menu framework. Here's the information within it. And then here are the resources that support it. So here are really good examples of block practice. Here are some really good games. Here are some really good ideas of gamifying these games. Now you kind of select off that menu, make it your own. So it's a framework that coaches can work within, but I think it's guiding their coaching as well, down the path that I believe in. The other way that I've done it is to allow players to, I've built it up and give them a selection and say, here are 3 games under the same theme. Which one do you want to play and why? And if they can justify why, then giving them choice is a really good thing. But I think it all goes back to, there's tons of choice here. There's a million different ways that you could connect all of these pieces together.
I appreciate that, Aaron. Thank you. There's another question here. Would you consider, to monitor the agreed expected behaviours of players in games and training, e.g., effort on effort? So if a player maybe makes a tackle, reloads, clears a ruck, in a possible sequence, are you maybe looking at that in terms of driving behaviours?
Yeah, I think if you go back to this example, if you're living within this kind of environment, again, it's quite adaptable. You can fill in the blanks. It doesn't have to be, level 1 can be whatever you want it to be. So you just start to put in the behavior that you would like to see out of your players. So again, you use it as you, either within the players or the capacity that the players and the coaches have. But you use it how it reflects in your environment the most. It's not a one-size-fits-all model.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Thanks, Aaron.
So level, your boss level could be consecutive tackles and a reload back onto your feet, or whatever you want it to be, whatever you would like to praise and reflect on.
Brilliant. Aaron, obviously you kind of touched on, you talked about, maybe analysing, coaches' behaviour and practice design in terms of getting the influence. Could you maybe speak to that more? You give a good example of your two, statistical breakdowns. Maybe just some of the things that you've seen, or some of the things that you'd like to see more of. You mentioned there when we do analysis, it's all on player performance, not necessarily on coach performance. If you could give us a really clear message coming out of this webinar tonight regarding analysing coaches' performance, what would that potentially be?
What would I like to see more? Sorry, give me that question again, because it was quite long-winded.
Yeah, it was very long-winded. Well, what would you like to see more of from coaches in regards to analysing their coaching?
Their coaching performance?
Yeah.
I think the coaching behavior, really kind of, a lot of us are saying that we're living in a developmental environment, and that we're intentional and we plan, but I don't believe that to be technically true, especially when pressure comes on, pressure for performance. I think there needs to be a lot more poise and intentionality around coaches' behavior. So I think just planning your coaching behaviors within that practice environment, being really intentional around, and I understand that we have a lot of grassroots coaches that are finishing work at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday, and they have training starting at 6, and they've still got to, get some food and pick up their son or daughter and drive them to training as well. And I want to take some of the pressure off of coaches around, rather than just coaching the way that they were coached or doing what they did last week because it was easy, getting them excited about their coaching by giving them tons of resources and ideas.
That's awesome. How would you potentially analyze co-coaching, and what could be key for the support of coaches? And I jumped ahead of Jack. Jack was next. Sorry, Jack, I forgot. Jack was next.
I think you need to define, again, what your role is. A good example of that might be somebody that's just going to go around and praise, give tons of positive reinforcement. So there's a great video that I've seen on positive praise. So the role of that co-coach might be just going around and picking out every time you see something that is a desired behavior, using a first name and then giving positive praise. And again, that could be a challenge. You could put a GoPro on that. You could pull out some really good best practice around what is the role of the co-coach, or it could be some really good best practice around what a skills master, what does that look like? How much is show, how much is tell, how to interact with that player, some really good questions to ask around, can I give you some feedback? That kind of stuff. I think you could get some really good clips of that and share that around so that co-coaches really understand their role as well.
Thanks, Aaron. I know we had Rusty's skills master Dan Meikle on here for a while. I'm not sure if he's still with us, but he was here. He was sitting in the other chat room on his own, wondering if we were going to start this, but I think he made the move. Jack, you got a question?
Yeah, a couple, Aaron. I suppose at the start it was great to see that this is still a lot of new things that you're researching, and I look forward to kind of seeing it develop. Was there any light bulb moment for you which made you start delving deep into this?
There's been a few, and it goes back a couple of years, but I've really loved the adaptive games. Some of this stuff, and what I see a lot, again, being really intentional around your coaching within games. So I see a lot of coaches, they'll set up a game and then they'll basically referee the game, and the coaching kind of falls by the wayside. So just being really intentional about your coaching within games. And I just, in my role in BC, and I'm sure that you find it as well, is our coaches don't have as much time as us to really research rugby, find good content, create a style of play or a philosophy, or just provide some direction. So the light bulb for me is I just don't feel like we have enough resources to really help coaches be the best coach and be kind of just show them some of the possibilities and some of the information that's out there, because they just don't have the time to go and do it themselves.
I suppose as a follow-up, considering that a lot of our community are still quite, as you said, don't have a ton of time to put into this. If you were to say 3 aspects of the game that they were to maybe take notice of or do some statistics on that would really open their eyes, in your experience and going from maybe even the senior men's, which you worked with for a long time and got to see those numbers and those stats, and all the way down to the grassroots now, what do you think could open the eyes for Canadian rugby?
Actually did an exercise on this last week. So some of the things I think is scanning and sharing information would be a massive one. The number of times you'll ask a player, did you see this? And the answer is yes. And then who did you tell? Nobody. So I think the sharing of information within a game would be a big one. I think the tactical aspect of the game, I did a kind of a review of a Kingsley Jones webinar around using the tactical within the kicking game. And I think just the understanding of the game from a tactical perspective would be a big one. I'm going to finish with probably just some leadership, just standing, coming questions within the game, and maybe even some emotional control. So I think just player behavioral stuff I think is important. Just being able to react under pressure, make good decisions, speak with each other well. That would be another pillar for me. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. Maybe I'll just take a couple more questions out and then we'll wrap up as we're kind of hit the hour mark here. First of all, are you prepared to share your slides after?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Just a reminder of the Google form that's in the chat box. We can, now that Mr. Takel has very generously offered to share the information, we can send it out to anyone that just registers on that Google Doc.
And I'll share the video as well. Hopefully it wasn't too jumpy when we went through it, of kind of bringing this South Africa game, bringing that to life. I'll share that video as well separately and take it out of the presentation just so that you go back and look through it. Hopefully it didn't get too jumpy when I just threw the screen share.
It's awesome. And then another question here. There's a couple of questions. Computer games seem to be a trend right now. And there's a lot of cool games like South Africa, the Fiji, New Zealand. Is there any other trends or things that you would really think about, or something that you would like to build a theme around?
Well, great question. I probably have to do some more thinking around that. I don't know. I think one of the good things that's coming out of us having all this thinking time, we're able to do a ton of learning at the moment. Like I said, this is still a big project under construction for me. I haven't done enough of really trying this. I was just getting into using a lot of this stuff when we went into the lockdown. So I'm not sure. I think I need to put some more thought into, how on point have we got this information so far. But I'm really not into what's next yet. I'm really still focusing on this stuff and making sure the resources are really user-friendly.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know we're kind of, you and I have chatted a lot about the kind of the use of the menu. I can't remember where it came from. Some guy on here potentially shared it with us. But we're really like the format of it, and I think there's lots of different things. You've given your kind of interpretation of it, and ours is like we're kind of using the sides as like the skills, the appetizers, mini games, and a whole range of different parts. But I really like the model, and I think it brings a little bit of clarity because we get so busy in our coaching, we maybe sometimes forget what's important, and we spend a lot of time trying to design the content instead of necessarily focusing more on our behaviors. If we know the style of play we're trying to play, if we've got a bank of games that feeds in towards it, then it allows us to maybe focus more on how we coach, not necessarily just being focused all the time on what we're coaching, which I think would therefore create a better experience for everybody. I think in a with our developmental hats on, we want people to be in the game and enjoy the game, where a lot of the time, our retention, I can only speak for our province here, but the retention rate isn't great. And I think that's due to the quality of the experience. Where having a format and a layout like this really allows us to focus more on our coaching behaviours, as the content and the session design has been laid out for you. So I think this adds a huge amount of value to everybody on the call here. So we've got time for probably one more question. If any, here's one here. Just as I said that, we'll maybe use this as the final one. Have you ever thought about creating games for retention rather than outcomes for match play? I never thought about it till I read the question.
Retention as in having a player come back to your club continually week after week?
Yeah.
I think the number one reason for that is fun, game time, and being active. I think these games tick those boxes. So I would hope that they go hand in hand with trying to retain players by giving them variety in their practice, lots of activity, hopefully fun, but also a challenge. I haven't thought about it in that way, but I would hope that it's kind of a knock-on effect from them.
So the good session design will have a greater experience, therefore hopefully improve retention.
Yeah, I think so. Look, I think, I get a lot of feedback, a lot of phone calls from probably players that have recently finished playing and their kids are going into rugby. And, there's a lot of environments that don't look fun and potentially need a lot of change. I think we need a bit of a paradigm shift in Canada around how we design practices, and potentially have to drift away from how we were coached in the past, and make some significant change, and hopefully get those retention rates up. Awesome.
That's good. No, it's been really good, Aaron. Just one, a couple of just things here I'll share. There's an updated Fun Maps article released this week that demonstrates these types of sessions support what kids want, which is good. Maybe Phil, if you could maybe just pop that in the chat here, so we could if you could maybe just pop it in here, that would be awesome. Another thing too as well, simple things like extra points for the number of high fives, supporting team members, creating that inclusive environment. I know that's something that's in the cards for the coaching cards, challenge cards that the Magic Academy have. So definitely worth having a look at these things and attempt to challenge your behaviour. I sat and went through mine on Friday night and I had my little mind spinning here. So one final question, unless you it's not for Aaron, but Aaron, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would love to see how people take this information and make it your own. Like I said at the beginning of this information is adopted and adapted from other people. So it's now been forwarded on to you if you haven't seen this stuff before. But I would love to see, I'm sure there are people that could do a better job with this or do it differently. And I would love those people to share what you're doing, be creative with it and make it your own and make it true to the environment that you're coaching within.
That's awesome. Some really good feedback here. Somebody said, thanks guys, great webinar. One of the best ones from Canada yet. So good job, Aaron. Some positive feedback for you there. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure everybody else has. The question, Jack, go back to the first question. Do you have pants on?
I'm always ready for the game, off shorts and socks.
That a boy, Jack. That a boy. When you did challenge me earlier, Jack, I did have to find the only pair of rugby shorts that I do have, but I'm ready for action as well. Thanks for the coordinated effort. We will make the webinar available after. It'll go up in the Rugby Alberta Coaches Corner Facebook group. I'll share it with Jack and Aaron as well. And we'll maybe pass it over to our Biffle friends in Ontario. Hi Ryan, I see you joining us here. We'll share it with you guys as well. But no, thanks everybody for tuning in. It's been the biggest one yet. Aaron, great job. We really appreciate your effort.
Thanks, guys.
Everybody stay safe in this current time. Thanks everybody. Good night.
Great.